Church. I've got a couple quick announcements. One Day to Feed the World is next week, and that's where we take one day out of the year's paycheck to go to one Day to Feed the World, Convoy of Hope, and that helps feed people all around the world, orphans and other people in need each day. And so it's an awesome thing we do. That is next week, so don't forget that. And then also, since I'm the high school pastor, and I don't get to get up here much, I got to make a plug real quick for Whiteout. And I probably should have cleared this with Kirk, but yeah, he'll be fine. He's hunting, so. I'm kidding. He said I could. Anyway, in a couple months, we have this event called Whiteout, and it's our biggest youth ministry event all year. And it's where we take a bunch of students to this camp up in Buena Vista, and it's an amazing time. Anyway, the quick announcement is on December 18th will be the first day that we can sign up for Whiteout. And if you sign your student up, or students if you're in here, if you sign up, you get $15 off your registration cost. Also on that weekend, you can find out about being kitchen help, which we take about 45 adults from here to run the kitchen for the whole camp, about 500 students. So that's an awesome time, something that you can volunteer for. And also we do scholarships for students, and we do that through you guys. It's a program called Will Work for Whiteout. So anyway, you'll be hearing more about it, but in 2 weeks, official signups for that. All right? Hey! All right. Let's pray real quick. Father, we just ask that you would teach us during this time. And we're grateful to be here, but we know that if you're not here, if you're not moving and speaking and translating the words that I'm talking about, that it's really pointless. And so for all of us, we just submit ourselves to you. We pray that we would see you as the true light and learn how to be your witness bearers to others. And so God, just do that. We invite you and welcome you in. In your name we pray. And everybody said? Amen. All right. Hey, it's Christmas season. Isn't it great to be in Christmas season? Isn't it? Anybody go to the Parade of Lights last night? That was awesome, wasn't it? All these floats coming by, and it's freezing. We bundled up our daughter. She's a 1-year-old, and layers and layers and layers of clothing, and we had a blast. I just love the Christmas season. I love the traditions. I love hot cocoa. I love getting presents. I love cutting down a Christmas tree. We went to the Uncompahgre yesterday and cut down a Christmas tree. I love all the traditions, and since I was a little kid, there's just so many things about Christmas that I've just grown to look forward to in Christmas time, right? And this Christmas season, we're starting a series here at church called What's Driving Christmas? And essentially, we're trying to ask the question, what do we do with Christmas? Because in some ways, it's such a God-honoring, Christ-centered holiday, and in other ways, it's like there's ladies pepper spraying people for Xboxes, and Black Friday has become the rage. And really, Christmas has such mixed reviews for us, right? And there's even churches around the country that we've found that are actually poo-pooing Christmas. They're actually saying, stay away from Christmas. It's bad. It's evil. It's become so materialistic, and people worship the devil during that time, and stay away from it. And we're like, really? What can we actually practically do in our community as people who want to put Christ first, but also as people who hopefully love the holidays and all the things to look forward to? And so each week we're going to be taking a specific element of the Christmas season. We're going to be talking about the roots and the history of it and kind of where traditions started. And then we're going to be trying to talk about how we can redeem those things to point ourselves to Jesus. And today we're going to be talking about Christmas lights and Christmas trees and some of the traditions of how Christmas started. And so I did some research, and I've been looking around online trying to figure out where some of this started. And the things I found were really interesting. It turns out that Christmas trees, the idea of putting an evergreen tree, cutting it down and putting it in your house, started actually way before Christmas even started. Actually started in the Scandinavian, Northern European area of the world, and it was even before Jesus came, people were doing this. And what they would do is they would actually worship this tree, because in their area, the light during the winter solstice time of year was almost nothing. They would have as little as 3 hours of light each day, right? Winter solstice happens on December 21st. It's the shortest day of the year. And so what would happen is these people would cut down these trees. They'd bring them in their house and they'd worship them because they were seemingly the only thing in all of nature that wouldn't fall apart during the Christmas season, during the winter season, the cold season. And they would stay green and they would stay vibrant, and you could even cut them down and bring them inside and they would stay that way. And so they worshiped them, asking this tree to bring them, health and prosperity and good agriculture over the next year. And then they would also do this thing called the Yule log. And what the Yule log was is they'd cut down a massive tree, as big as they could find. And they would take this log and they would haul it into their house. And on December 21st, they would start the celebration that the days were starting to get longer. And so they would light this log, and it would sometimes burn up to 10 days. That was about the range. And during that time, they would party. It was basically like, all right, there's nothing else to look forward to. It's dark all the time. So let's eat, drink, and be merry. And that's what they would do. They'd eat and drink until they passed out, and then they would wake up, and then they would eat and drink until they passed out, and then they would do it again. And it was like this awesome celebration of, well, we don't have much else to look forward to, so let's light the Yule log and let's party. And that wasn't just their culture that did this sort of thing. If you kind of go south to the Roman area, they had this day around the same time called Saturnalia. And it was worship of the god of agriculture, which was Saturn, they called him. And what they would do is they would offer all these kind of sacrifices to this god Saturn, hoping that in return he would bless them with a fruitful next year. And it would even go as far as they would absolutely party as well. And so if you look at history, it sounds like an ancient Mardi Gras festival. And it was like all their restrictions that they normally had in life would just be thrown off. And for about 7 to 10 days, they would just party. They would have a blast. They would do whatever they wanted. Whatever happens during Saturnalia stays during Saturnalia, kind of thing. And so in the 4th century, Christians started to see this, that every time of year when it got really dark and bleak out and cold, people would just go crazy. They would just throw restrictions to the wind, and they would just, party like crazy. And they kind of saw that and thought, maybe this isn't a great thing. And so I got an idea. I can imagine, sitting in a circle thinking, what should we do? They decided to make a holiday for Jesus' birth. And they were like, we'll do it in competition. Which the funny thing is, it's not really the right time of year for Jesus' birth. It's hard to tell when actually Jesus was born, because the books in the Bible don't say, and he was born on the 5th day of May or whatever. But there's a couple hints that give us the idea that, shepherds with their young watching over the flock, they probably didn't do that during the Christmas season out on the hillside. I'm sorry, I keep saying Christmas season. The winter solstice season. They probably didn't do it during the December type of era. And there's other things that relate to that. And so what they decided, though, is, we need a time to celebrate Jesus coming to this world. And all these guys are just going crazy, and maybe we could do a competing holiday, and they might give up some of their wildness and come over to the non-dark side, right? And so that's what they did. And pretty soon it took off, and their competition, they won, and Christmas became this celebration of Jesus' birth. But what happened is a lot of these different traditions started to get adopted into it. And so a lot of the traditions that we even celebrate now really have nothing to do with Jesus. And they just have to do with, traditions, which I think is great. And one of the really interesting stories about how Christmas lights came about was a guy named Martin Luther, and this was all the way up to the 15th century. And Martin Luther was the starter of the Reformation. He kind of officially started the Lutheran church. And anyway, what happened is he was walking home one day, and he was surrounded by evergreens in his village. And as he looked up, he saw the moon shining through these evergreens, and he thought, man, that's beautiful. And he had this thought, this is a great picture of the hope that we have in Jesus, that even in the darkness, as I look through this tree, which was an image that they still had. They had trees in their houses. it's this picture of how Jesus shines through. And so he went home, and he didn't have duct tape, but he had other things, and he started making a little candle holder, and he put it up on the tree, and he thought, man, that's pretty good. And then he did another one, and pretty soon his tree was full of lights, and his neighbors and his family started to see it, and they were like, that's awesome. That's great. I'm going to do that. And so they started doing it, and Martin Luther actually started using that as an illustration to people to talk to them about how their hope comes through the light of Jesus. And so we have all these different traditions, right? And what do we do with them? And how do we take them? And if it started from, worshiping a tree, does that mean if we have a tree in our house that we're somehow disobeying God? And the quick answer is no, but you're going to have to come back to the rest of the series to hear that one. But today we're going to talk about lights. And as I was researching this and just thinking about it, I was thinking how great it is that Christmas happens when it does. Right? Again, the winter solstice happens in the northern hemisphere on December 21st. And that's the shortest day of the year. And during that time, right, the light that is the sun has moved to a very minuscule amount compared to the darkness. And really, it's kind of, in and of itself, I was thinking about this, it's kind of depressing. I mean, think about if Christmas was during July. I'd kind of be bored with it. Like, actually, I'm sorry, I'm busy fishing, and oh yeah, I'll get a present, I guess, but there's so much to do, right, in July? And it's just like, I'm always so busy in July. But December, all I think about is Christmas. I mean, there's nothing else during December, right? Because it's dark out, and I think it's just like our lives. Sometimes we have seasons in our life where there's just a lot of light, and things are good, and we don't really need anything else to give us light and energy and something to shoot for. And then other times of our life, it's like the darkness has started to encroach upon that light. And it's like there's almost this, I don't want to say sadness, but it's like we need a light to look forward to. We need something to drive us. And it really comes down to, I think we don't realize how critical the light is until we're in darkness, right? If I ask the sound guys, hey, could you shut off all the lights? Turn into chaos in here, probably. If I kept preaching, it'd be weird, at least, right? Because we have this need for light. And you've all probably had different moments, times in your life where you felt the need for light. As I was thinking about it, I remembered back to hunting season this year. And I had this great idea. I thought it was an epiphany. And it was that I was going to go where no other hunters go to kill the elk. And so I was going to throw a backpack on my back. And since there was nobody else that wanted to do this with me, I was just going to take my bow and hike into the middle of the wilderness by myself for 5 days, and I was going to shoot an elk. And it didn't work out so well for me. But it didn't take very long that I was back in the wilderness before I realized, like, this is kind of depressing. I mean, it was just so vast around me. And then night came. Oh, that was the worst. And I looked on the map, and I was in this canyon called Bear Park. And I mean, every snap of a twig, every movement in the branches, every little chipmunk that ran on the ground, I was like, what is that? I'm turning on my light. I had a bivy sack, so I was sleeping outside. It's the worst idea ever. And so I kept waking up and turning on my light. Okay, it's okay. It's a squirrel. And it was kind of I hate to admit it, but it was a little bit of a depressing time. And during that time, I couldn't help but think about Vanessa and Ingrid and the things that light my life. I was so happy to get home. And while it was a really great time, it really drove me towards what really is light in my life. And so as we have this physical need for light, we also have a deeper need. And I'll explain that in a little bit, but I think the best clip, we can't talk about Christmas lights without showing the clip from Chevy Chase's Christmas Vacation. So let's go ahead and watch this. It's pretty good, huh? All right. That was a joke, sorry. give it one more try. Okay. How about we'll try? I think I can work it in a little bit later. You guys mess with it, and it's such a good clip. You know, it's a scene where he's lighting his house, and we'll have to see it. But I think it shows this clip, and really the story that I showed, that while we do have this physical need for light, right? If we're walking around, we don't have light, we stub our toe, and it gets annoying, and it's hard to walk around, and we have to, move slowly. But if we have light, then we can, run around, and we can see the obstacles in our way. And in the same way, we need something spiritually to look forward to, too. My need for light, so I could see the bear that was around me while I was hunting, was augmented by the idea that I really needed a deeper light. The vastness, the darkness, really, it drove me towards thinking about the people that I love. Because humans are way different than animals, right? We're different in the sense that we have what I'm going to call a spiritual need for light, right? Something to look forward to. For lots of us, well, you've heard the phrase, "You're the light of my life." I hear that a lot from our grandparents, well, my daughter's grandparents, so our parents, because they talk about Ingrid, our daughter, and they talk about how much they love seeing her. And I can relate to that. It's like I can have the worst day ever, but I come see Ingrid, and it's just like, oh man, life is good. It's driving, it's motivating for me to see her, right? And she just started saying no, which shouldn't be that cute, but it is, and I hate laughing when she says it because she means it, but it's just so great to be around her. She lights up my life. And for others of us, we see things like, I don't know, kids that drive us, or maybe it's work. We have something, we love looking forward to making money and the things that money can buy. For others of us, it's hobbies, It's the newest hatch in fly fishing, or it's the next thing that we're going to sew, or, we have little things that drive us, that give us purpose, that are deeper than our just physical need for light. And I think it shows that deeper need that we all have, the spiritual need for light. All right, let's see if that clip works. If it doesn't, you'll have to come back to the 6 o'clock. Oh, okay. Sorry. I'll just tell you about it. Chevy Chase, amazing light on his house, and it shows him going to, and it doesn't work. And he's all devastated. At the same time, you see his wife going back into the back where the power switch wasn't on, and so she flips on the power switch right when he does it again, not knowing that she was just trying to look at the light where she was in the basement, and the lights go on, and he's cheering, and he's like, "Hey, everybody, get out here!" And then they come out right as she flips the light off. And he's like, "What?" He starts screaming, and he's, doing this, and it's not working, and everybody's like, "This is lame. What are you doing?" And my favorite part of the scene is there's a little Santa, a plastic Santa in his front, and of the house, and he just runs up to it, starts kicking it and punching it and knocking the reindeer's antlers off, and he's just going nuts. And then finally his wife flips on the light again, and then it goes, and he's like, "Oh," and there's choruses of angels and such. And it kind of represents, like he needed that physical light, but more than the physical light, he wanted to impress the people, and he'd been working so hard to get it. And again, it just points at this idea that we have two sorts of lights that drive us. The physical sense, but deeper, is we need purpose. We need something to be living for. And the neat thing about John, the Gospel of John, is that he takes this approach. The writer of the Gospel of John, his name was John, takes this approach about dealing and talking about the deeper need that we have for light in our life. Right? There's 4 Gospels, and each of the Gospels document the Christmas story. And they each talk about Jesus, how he came into the world, how he lived, and how he left the world. And the neat thing about this Gospel of John, it's really, we don't usually focus on it at Christmas time because it's not very practical. Like Luke was like mangers and camels and censuses. And I mean, that's a great story, right? It's awesome. But John takes the more figurative approach. He addresses this deeper need that we have for light. So today, that's what we're going to be studying. We're going to be looking at John 1. And if you can turn there, that'd be great. If you like to follow along on the screen, we've got that as well. Here we go, John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Just take a couple minute break to explain that word. That word is logos, which is basically the word for truth that the Bible uses, and it's also representing Jesus. So again, John is taking a figurative approach to telling this story. So rather than using words like Jesus, he uses, well, what did Jesus do? Like, who is Jesus at the core? He says he's the Word. He's the truth. In him is truth, and we'll get to that more. So he says, in the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. So he was in fact God. And all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Verse 4 is our first reference to light. In him was life. So in Jesus was life. And the life was the light of men. Here's our first reference to the idea that Jesus, being our life, was actually the spiritual light that we are shooting for. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Verse 6, there was a man sent from God, whose name was John. This is John the Baptist. We can read more about him later in John 1. But John the Baptist was a man that came to bear witness. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Verse 7, he came as a witness, to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light. He came to bear witness about the light. And then I think the key verse here is verse 9. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. That is Jesus, the true light. He was going to come to the world. And this is what we're celebrating Christmas time. And then in verse 12, to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. All right, now we're going to spend the next couple of moments focusing on the idea of Jesus being the light, and what does that mean? And as I was thinking about this, it was hard to grapple with what does it mean practically that Jesus is the light. For any of you who have gone to church for any amount of time, we always hear and talk about how Jesus is the light. But practically, I was thinking, what does that mean? How does that make my life different that Jesus is my light? And so I had to think through this, first verse 9, which says, the true light which enlightens everyone was coming into the world. And it led me to think about, okay, so what is John trying to communicate? He's trying to communicate the idea that Jesus is the light. So I think we have to take it a step back and say, well, what does light do so that we can see why is he pointing to Jesus being the light, right? So the first thing that I saw is light does not come from the darkness. This is just kind of quick, but light can't be created out of darkness. Light is separate from darkness. And I think that's crucial in understanding. We don't create light. We don't do anything in our life to create light. God comes outside of our life, not dependent on the darkness, and he shines the light. He chooses whether to flip the switch on or not. And his light shines in that darkness. The second thing is light illuminates darkness. Okay, this is an interesting one as we draw the correlation. I mean, practically, we talked about this earlier, we need light to walk around. I mean, just to see, if we don't have light, we're totally in trouble, right? We're not canines, we're not fish, we can't see in the night. And so we need light to direct us. And I think the spiritual parallel that John is going for is that in and of ourselves, we live in darkness. The Bible calls this sin, right? And when we sin creates a spiritual darkness. Back to the analogy we use later, in darkness, we have this covering, this lack of direction, inability to shoot for something, right? We're kind of stumbling around, and that's what sin creates in us. By ourselves, we sin, and then we stumble around, and we don't know our way, and we get confused. And man, I can so relate to that in my life. And we could probably talk about that for the rest of the week. But, in and of ourselves, we sin, that creates darkness. And Jesus is the only thing that can bring light to that darkness. It's like driving at night. Anybody ever done that before? Anybody ever driven at night with their lights off? Kind of dangerous. You shouldn't do that, right? Because without that light, we don't know the direction that we're going. And that's what he's saying. Without Jesus as the light, it's like driving down a highway without having that light. Our life is directionless. And we don't have the ability in and of itself to kind of, I don't know, I wrote this. We can't squint harder. We can't open our eyes more, right? We can't yell at the darkness and make it become light. In and of ourselves, we can't do anything to light the way. And that's the correlation John is saying, that in and of ourselves, with light, or without light, we live in darkness. So we need enlightened, in other words. And then the third thing about light, again, this is the practical things about light. Light gives life. And here's where I'm not an expert at all. Like, really, not at all. But I've heard of something called photosynthesis, and maybe some of you biology people know more. Actually, I had a guy come up later and after the first service and give me some better words for it. But as I understand it, leaves need light to live and grow. And as they live and grow, something called photosynthesis happens where they take in the light and then a byproduct, they live, right? They live. And then the byproduct of that is oxygen. And that's how we live. So if we take that a step farther, if we don't have light in our world, we don't live. If the sun stopped coming up, we'd be done. And that's the correlation I think that John is going at. Again, lots of light correlations here. But without the sun in our light, we cease to live and to really live. And John 10:10 talks about this. He says, Jesus says, "For I came that you may have life and that you may have it to the fullest." And that's what Jesus wants for us, to have the fullest amount of direction and life and something to look forward to. And in him, that's how we find it. It gives us something to look forward to. It gives us direction and purpose. This light can sustain true life. So the second thing, that's the idea that Jesus came to be the light, right? And then imagine over here now, the second, I think, important part about this passage that we read in John is about John the Baptist. In verse 7, it said, "He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him." And there's two ways that I see that John the Baptist lived to bear witness. The first thing is he lived for a bigger purpose. Right? John the Baptist, again, he came before Jesus, and if you read the story, he was this crazy guy that went out into the wilderness and he preached, "The coming light is coming." And as you kind of study the history of this time, this was a big deal for them. The Jews were ruled by Romans. The Romans had decided, you know what, we can make a lot of money off of these people, and we can do less work ourselves if we just take them over. So they came to Israel, they took over the Jews, and then they made them slaves, and they took all their money. And they use it to further Roman stuff. And so these Jews were sick of this. And there had been all these prophecies, these talk about eventually God would come back and that he would become their true Messiah, leader, savior, and that God himself would come to earth and that he would take over all these Romans and he would point them back on the track where they were not ruled and reigned by anybody else. And so John knew that, and instead of just living in that, he lived for a greater purpose. He lived for the purpose of pointing to Jesus. John found his calling in the people's need to overcome. He lived beyond the moments. And that's the second point I want to make about John, is that he always pointed to Jesus. And even the very first question, if you read John John 1:15, the people around him said, "Who are you?" And, basically he had been doing these amazing things, and they were like, who are you? Tell me about yourself. And his first thing is, I am not the light, is what he says. I am not the Messiah. I am not the one that comes to save. He is. He's coming. Jesus is coming, and he always pointed his way to Jesus. And it's kind of like the sun and the moon. The sun is the only real light source in our life, right? I guess